Cuffay put up with a lot of racism, especially through the press. The Times in particular called him the black man in his party. I mean, to call him the black man in his party showed how important he was. It was almost like the Chartists was his movement. Fortunately, the Chartists accepted him as a leader of the Chartists, a black man who was a leader of the biggest movement this country's ever seen. So why haven't we heard of him?
William Cuffay was one of the main Chartist leaders in London, Chartism being that set of struggles which led to the privileges that we enjoy if and when we choose to go to vote. Basically having a secret ballot, not needing to own property in order to vote. One man, one vote. They were not looking for one women's suffrage at all. So all of the privileges which we enjoy when and if we vote, they were fighting for, which of course to our minds, these are not revolutionary demands, but in the 1840s they are. He was born in Chatham in Kent. His father was, again, one of the thousands of black men serving in the Royal Navy, originally from St. Kitts, and his mother was a Kentish woman.
And Chatham was a very dirty town and a very poor place to grow up in. Cuffay suffered from rickets, so he grew up deformed and very small stature. But he left Chatham eventually and came to London, where he became a tailor. And the tailors at that time were quite a militant organisation.
Cuffay trained as a tailor, and like many people, tailors especially during this period, found himself drawn to working class politics, to the politics of organised labour, and basically having a decent standard of living for the lower echelons in society. William Cuffay was a lot more organised as a tailor. It was his business. We have fire insurance certificates for him in South London and in Central London. This is a man who's running a business. He's quite serious about what he's doing. William Cuffay certainly started off as a hard-working, conventional tailor, but he would have been disillusioned at some stage with either the rates that tailors were being offered or the conditions on which tailors had to work. Something must have happened to radicalize him, to throw his lot in with the mass of tailors who were more like Robert Wedderburn. They were working piece by piece, item by item. They were repairing old clothes. They were selling old clothes on.
And he was involved in a strike of tailors. I think this would be about the 1830s. And the strike in the end failed, and he found it very difficult to get a job. And so he became involved in the political movement of the time, which was Chartism.
William Cuffay was the elected leader of the London Chartists. He sat on the 5-man Chartist National Executive Committee, all of which is made more interesting by the fact that he was a man of African origin.
He campaigned for ordinary people, which is what the Chartist movement was about. It was about people working in factories, in the potteries, in mines and so on. All these people were getting together, organising huge petitions. There were petitions of millions of signatures being rolled into Parliament and there put before the people.
Fellow citizens of London, a great change is sweeping this country, now as never before. We have the chance to rid ourselves from the shackles of the past. Your forefathers and my forefathers created the wealth of this country, and now it's time for the working class people, like ourselves, to be represented properly in Parliament.
The final rally of the Chartists in 1848, he was there active, wanting to actually used the hundreds of thousands of people who had gathered south of the river to take over Parliament and take over ruling the country.
A new England is coming to birth, ladies and gentlemen, and the time has come for the working classes to be represented properly in Parliament and for the payment of the MPs.
So on the 10th of April 1848, you saw the largest public gathering of that year. And this was a gathering through which the charter, hence the Chartists, the 6 demands, the charter which had been signed by hundreds of thousands of people, would be presented to Parliament after having been marched through the city and taken across the river.
And in the same way that slaves were emancipated from slavery, women should also be emancipated from domestic slavery and given the right to vote and being elected into Parliament. These are exciting times, my friend. A change is in the air. And even if we don't see it in our lifetime, our children will live long enough to see that change.
This gathering struck absolute fear in the powers that were, the status quo, because 1848 is the year of revolutions throughout Europe. It's the year in which the working classes across Europe start seriously corresponding and looking at action. And talking of action, the most fired up section of the then British population were, of course, those from the island of Ireland, then still a part of Britain, many of whom had sent delegations of people specifically to this meeting on Kennington Common to look for some action. They didn't just want words. They were, like William Cuffay declared himself to be, they were physical force Chartists. As William Cuffay said on Kennington Common, all of this clapping is all very well and good, but will you fight for it? Well, there were some people there from Ireland and other working class people who were there to fight. They weren't just there to march to the Houses of Parliament, present a petition, and then go back to their homes. And the government knew that. They ordered the royal family out of London. They sent them to the Isle of Wight. They issued all of the small shopkeepers of central London with little truncheons. They drilled them a bit as a little militia. They brought in the heavy guns from Woolwich Arsenal. They brought them up and mounted them along the north bank of the Thames with the muzzles pointed towards South London. They stopped all traffic all across the bridges, all of the ferries and wherries between North and South London. They were also blocked up. Basically, they were ready. They were totally ready for anything kicking off from this demonstration.
Our Chartist petition has 6 points. Universal male suffrage, voting by ballot, no property qualifications, payment of MPs, equal constituencies, and annual parliaments.
Chartism, very broadly speaking, had 2 wings. One was the more middle-class establishment body of Chartists who believed in negotiating with the government, people who were themselves from comparatively prosperous backgrounds, who were well-meaning, but they were not ready for a rock. They were not looking for a fight at all, a physical fight. You also had, in opposition, and by comparison, the physical force Chartists, amongst whom Cuffay numbered himself.
We are going to lift our voices and let the whole of Parliament know that we are not going to be their political servants. We're going to let the whole of London know that the Chartists intend to march on Parliament. The slaves of the capital demand to be free. The working men of London has got to know. The middle classes has got to know. The Parliament has got to know. Everyone in London has got to know that we, the Chartists, demand protection for our labour.
If they had gone that day with Cuffay at their head or stewarding in any way, I'm convinced that that would have led to the largest loss of life in British domestic history. Because Remember, you had detachments of Marines on the streets of London. You also had thousands of police. You had citizens' militia, which had been energized and made manifest, against whom, you've just got a ragtag army of people marching up from South London with their railings and their hand tools. It would have been very, very ugly.
I might not get there with you, but I want you to know that we as the working class people of England will achieve our workers' rights.
There's an incident where he was accused of having a gun and was seen to actually pass the gun to his wife to get so it wouldn't be seen. But in fact, he justifies this in his defense by saying he'd been threatened, his life had been threatened, so that's why he needed a gun. And anyway, it was the right of all English people to own a gun if they wanted to.
As London representative of the Chartist movement, I stand before this court to advance our cause of workers' rights. I have laboured for over 20 years as a tailor in this country, and I cannot be happy knowing that my working conditions were worse than a slave's on the plantations. I've been denied fatherhood. Twice, I've been denied being a husband. I've been denied my job and any hope of future employment. Since being sacked from my tailoring job in 1834, I have thought about nothing else but improving the working conditions for my fellow tailors. And if getting arrested by the force of arms was the only way I can get my message across to you, then I've succeeded in my campaign. History will be my judge, not you. And because of that, I object to this trial, my lord, and demand to be judged by my peers according to the principles of the Magna Carta. If I am to be tried, then let me be judged by my equals. Let the poor and the lowly be my judge. Let those who are blacklisted against the workplace be my judge, not the middle classes who have their faces set against me. Whatever I did that brought me to this court, I was compelled to do.
He was arrested and put on trial. He made a wonderful speech in his defense, saying that he was doing his duty in trying to make this country more democratic.
If I am to die or be imprisoned for what I've done, then so be it. Because I'd rather die fighting for the rights of workers than live a miserable existence towing the line.
But he was found guilty and sentenced to transportation. In other words, he was going to Van Diemen's Land in Australia.
William Cuffay, you are charged with trying to overthrow the government, and it is my duty to be rid of you. Transportation for life to Tasmania.
He was sent to Van Diemen's Land, Tasmania, as a convict, which is where he died.
But he again is a hero, I think, of this country, and someone who's neglected, someone we don't learn about in school. I never heard anything about Cuffay. Most people still haven't heard about Cuffay. And again, there's a film to be made about this man who's, again, an orator, an activist, someone who could galvanize people into political activity. And now it's far more common to see black people in Parliament, for instance. And you could say that Cuffay was one of the forerunners of all this and paved the way for black people today to be politically active.